2, a 3. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is
the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 6th of May, 2019. Recessed happy Cinco de Mayo, which is the 5th of May. The celebration of Mexico's Independence Day. This is Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Very interesting week. Many things to quarterback. One note here, a future event. There's a national strike called by both Uber and Lyft drivers to protest working conditions. That will be on Wednesday. Let me make sure that I get the correct date here. That will be the 8th of May, Wednesday. Nonetheless, national strike. Don't ride either Lyft or Uber. Drivers will be on strike on that day, a one-day strike. And in many major cities, we'll have more on that as it develops. In other events, a number of ships are moving, an aircraft carrier and some accompanying ships, you always have those, are moving to the Persian Gulf, the area around Iran. Supposedly threats were made there. I'm assuming they're talking about the Straits of Hormuz, but I'm not certain about where they are. Actually, we'll hear more about that. And an interview with the BBC, Juan Guaido, the self-proclaimed president who, according to one publication, had more followers outside of the U.S. Embassy in Washington than he had in Venezuela at his so-called premier to coup d'etat that he had the other day prior to May Day. He had a few people out there. There have been various figures given, anywhere from 15 to perhaps as many as 20. And he was there with Lopez, the outlaw, who after the little demonstration announcement asking the military to overthrow the president of Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro Mora. Anyway, nonetheless, nothing happened. The bulk of the soldiers said they were hoodwinked into thinking it was a different type of exercise. They retreated. Lopez disappeared. At first, Lopez went to the Chilean embassy there in Caracas. They put him politely on the way, and he ended up at the Spanish embassy there, and with a warning from Spain not to conduct political activities. All of this swirled around Pompeo being on the numerous talk shows on Sunday, saying that plans were underway, at least saying and implying, for a military option in Venezuela. Now we'll go to foreign affairs and we'll talk about what some of those scenarios could actually mean to how the U.S. would conduct their operations. And basically they're the same old cookie cutter that they've been using for many, many years with Wilsonian foreign policy. Another quirk in this, that Alexandria-Ocasio-Cortez is going along with the Democratic leadership, which is following the same Wilsonian foreign policy, in not denouncing U.S. intervention in Venezuela. Now that shows a problem in some of these so-called progressives out there. There's a lack of ideology, and this goes across many spheres. That in the presidential campaign, Bernie Sanders has denounced that, one of the prominent candidates to denounce U.S. intervention in Venezuela. Some of the others are going along, quote-unquote, to get along. Now, we've seen this scenario pan out prior to that. Many people got caught up in that resolution to support the Iraq War the second time around. And they later had to regret it, at least publicly. Hillary DeMonster Clinton was one. The president candidate, Joe Lunchbox Biden, another one. And now this becomes somewhat of a feature, and we'll get into that also later. Here talking about, I hope I have the article up, the Democratic candidates focusing on domestic issues. Most presidential candidates focus on domestic issues, or would like to focus on domestic issues, including but not limited to DJ Trump. He was a domestic man, America first, etc., etc. An isolationist, basically getting out of these basic foreign occupations, and now his administration is faced with occupying another country if the military situation is successful that they anticipate, going better than these other deals involving the puppet Juan Guaido. Guaido hasn't been able to get anything going. He had an interview with the BBC. He had nothing to say there either. But the problem is that the American foreign policy is becoming so weakened that they have to resort to characters like this to quote-unquote make a stand, hoodwink the Venezuelan people into thinking that they'll get a change. And they put the word in democracy in there, when in fact that will not be what they will get. His basic mentor is this infamous Lopez, who is a fascist. So you're not going to get any democracy out of that, any form of democracy out of that. So that is where you are stuck. Let's kind of move on here and try to get to the meat of this. And we'll get back to him. And let me just see what we have here. I will do E.J. Dionne, one of our favorite liberal types. The Democrats, and this is where we are downplaying foreign policy. It's shrewd, and it may be a mistake. Why aren't the Democratic presidential candidates talking more about foreign policy? Are they being shrewd and playing down a divisive concern that is not at the forefront of, or at the front of voters' minds? Or are they missing an opportunity? The right answer is both. And he uses the infamous Center for American Progress, I call it the Center for No Progress, finds that when Americans look at the world, they think primarily about their government can keep them safe and bolster their economic opportunity. Some would say opportunism. But at the most basic level, voters want American foreign policy and national security policy to focus on two concrete goals: protecting the U.S. Homeland and it from people's external threats, particularly terrorist attacks, and protecting jobs for American workers. The report finds. Well, DJ Trump announced that he would do all of that, and he kind of fell short in places like Ohio. even if the Democrats running for president are concentrating their energies on domestic goals, well, that is what the voters want too. Progressive group surveys provide overwhelming evidence that American voters want the U.S. to stay strong at home, first and foremost to help it to compete in the world. They express a clear desire for more investment in U.S. infrastructure. Well, the Democrats and D.J. Trump are working on a $2 trillion bill. Healthcare, education, not much investment there. They would like to destroy, the President administration and their cronies, destroy healthcare and education. And a less inclusive force focused on the military and defense spending as part of a revamped foreign policy approach that gets America ready to compete with other countries. So why not highlight infrastructure, healthcare, and education and leave foreign policy by the wayside? Because these surveys also find that foreign policy is genuine of vulnerability for President Trump, while voters nearly 50% to 48% approve of the president's handling of the economy. Very, very close there. Some polls actually show more of that. A majority, 57% to 47%, disapprove his handling of foreign policy. Well, that could change with a military intervention or military action in the Mideast. That's always going back to yesteryear's rally round the flag, boys, rally round the flag. We'll change that today. Rally round the flag, boys and girls. Don't want to be politically incorrect. The U.S. is the most respected in the world because of Trump's leadership, while 62% picked the other option. Under President Trump, America is losing respect around the world and alienating historic allies. John Hoppin, a senior fellow and lead author of the study, points out a paradox. Most Americans dislike Trump's approach, but his distance from old foreign policy establishment is a political asset. That would mean somewhat from Wilsonian foreign policy. But remember, Wilson was a basic American first type. He was a racist, true and true. Washington at the time, a southern city, was trying to get into a more integrated stance. Particularly they had in employment, cinemas, etc. Wilson immediately brought back apartheid to the city and vanished African American workers. The language and politics of the foreign policy expert community simply doesn't work with many voters. Halperin said in an interview, people are confused by abstract calls to defend the liberal international order, fight authoritarianism. Lack of clarity about goals and visions of the center left opens the door for Trump-like nationalism to take hold, even though the president himself is unpopular. Well, no doubt about that, but the war, and anyway, let's get ahead of ourselves here. One of the study's striking innovations is a new a typological definition of how different groups of Americans view foreign policy. The bottom line is our nation is fractured. Using the survey's 20 questions to capture voters' priorities and values, the researchers found that the largest group, 33% of voters, that's not very large, describe Trump as a nationalist. They prioritize military spending, fighting terrorism, focusing on concerns at home, and opposing the United States' role as a world police type. Well, that's been brought out by various other groups, including groups on the left. Close behind and very different were global activists at 28%. They emphasize working with allies on climate change, disease, poverty, inequality, equal rights, and stress the importance of international institutions. The smaller group reflects the attitude of those who tend to dominate mainstream foreign policy debates Traditional internationalists, 18%, focus on the U.S. duty to engage in world affairs, the benefits of trade alliance, importance of defending democratic values, obligation to use force in response. This is what gets them into trouble. To frets. Real unreal. I have added that with emphasis. Taken together, the activists and the internationalists outnumber the nationalists by a margin of 3 to 2. But the fusion between the activists of newer and older forms of global engagement show how hard creating a consensus against Trumpism could be. And an analysis undertaken by the CAP at my request demonstrates that bipartisan foreign policy is not in the cards. Well, ask AOC about that. Amongst Democrats, 48% of global activists, 10% are Trump nationalists. Amongst Republicans, 61% are nationalists and only 7% activists. In the 2020 race, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders have made the most substantial effort to link progressive economics with opposition to authoritarianism, and also kleptocracy abroad. Applin argues that there's no room for contestants to elaborate a strong at home and a strong in the world view. But there is powerful incentives for them to avoid to avoid aggregating democratic foreign policy rips, and traditional nationalists face enormous challenge in selling concepts they hold dear to an electorate weary of war and anxious about increased competition in the world. It doesn't do that any good, no doubt about that. Let's jump on here. We won't cover the Russian airliner. Pompeo, we talked about it. Pompeo promised to consult Congress. This is from the Washington Post, incidentally. If they invade on the EBC this week, whether President Trump believes he has the powers to invade without seeking a Congress approval from the Congress. Pompeo had no answer at all. I don't want to speak to that. Pointing to the powers granted to the President as Commander-in-Chief under the Constitution. Whatever law has been passed since then. Todd C. Young, he's a Republican from Indiana, called on leaders of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. What that used to be Senator Lucas' position. He was chair. He was also from Indiana, of which he's a member, to hold hearings on the use of military force in Venezuela. They'd better hurry up. Young is the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. For many years, lawmakers have been mired in a battle with the executive and across party lines as they debate drafting new authorization for U.S. Current military campaigns and demanding a more deference from commanders-in-chiefs, from the commander-in-chief when it comes to launching fresh new ones. Already this year, several Republicans, including allies of DJ Trump, broke with the White House in a vote to invoke the War Powers Resolution to end U.S. participation in the Saudi-led campaigns that killed hundreds of thousands of people in Yemen, arguing that Congress had never authorized the measure past Congress, but Trump vetoed it. Make no mistake, we have a full range of options. We are preparing. That's what Pompeo said. We are preparing those for him so that when the situation arises, we are not flat-footed. Juan Guaido did not rule out accepting U.S. military assistance. Well, he has no supporters in Nicaragua. In Venezuela. Definitely not in Nicaragua. These things sometimes take time. That's what he told Chris Wallace. We know it's going to happen. I'm not going to talk about all the various conversations that are taking place. We continue to work with leaders down there. I guess that's in Venezuela. If you think about it, where this country was 90 days ago, the Venezuelan people should be very proud. How can they be very proud when they can't get basic resources because of the sanctions period there? As a candidate, Trump questioned the logic of committing U.S. military to more conflicts overseas. The administration has adopted a more hawkish stance since the ascendancy of this nut from Kansas, Pompeo, and John Bolton, who was the architect of the failed Iraqi war. On Face the Nation basically had the same thing to say. Nothing new there. Nothing new on Chairman Kim. The only thing he could say as President Trump gets to decide his negotiation will be, Chairman Kim will have to make his own decision. Well, no doubt about that. Pompeo employed much softer language. His answer, he said that the Trump administration has pushed back against China over its 2 million people held in re-education camps. Nothing new there. Margaret Brennan, challenged his choice of words and numbers, asking whether there was a dispute within the administration. And the only thing Pompeo could say, we have a lot of different terms to describe what's taking place. So kind of leave it at that. We'll go to the Miami Herald now, and several stories of coming out of it. And I think, let me just make sure we're up to date here. The same story that the Caribbean moved there. This is from the Associated Press. Possible attack on American forces led to deployments. I wonder if this is another Gulf of Tonkin. Who knows? And on immigration, this is online from the Herald again. 1 million immigrants have applied online for citizenship, green cards, and more. They put it online now, and was a very good idea. The online tools available at the Citizenship and Immigration Services website. U.S. government's given legal immigrants the ability to apply for immigration benefits online. The immigration authorities celebrate the milestone in their effort to embrace a digital era because it streamlines their operation and legal process, often reducing wait time for immigration application benefits like achieving American citizenship through nationalization or green card replacement for permanent residency. Online filing is more convenient and interactive in ways for applicants to submit their applications, check the status of their case, and receive notices of that. That's from Jennifer Collins in a statement sent to El Nuevo Herald. Applicants can be more confident they are providing necessary information and payment. You've got to pay, and incidentally, and receipt processing their cases will not be delayed by mail or clerical error. Very important there. That's one of the things that has improved drastically. Online applications, you get much more transparency. You don't get into this issue that your papers were lost in the mail, and you can certify that things are actually there. It reduces time and costs they spend sharing and moving and storing and scanning a printed documents related to the request. It benefits. It is very important. On another issue, 90 Cuban escape immigration detention centers. This is in southern Mexico. This is in a town there of Toulouse. Wait, hold it. Chile. This is in the Chiapas, the state of Chiapas there. It's according to the National Immigration Institute. That's in Mexico. And this is through rivals in the southern border. dwindling numbers of humanitarian visas to immigrants trying to reach the U.S. More than 600 Cubans fled the center in late April, and Mexico flew 170 Cubans back home. So they are also coming in from that vantage point. Now this is foreign affairs, and let's get into this. This was on March the 19th, 2019. What a military intervention in Venezuela would look like. This is by Frank Mora. Getting in would be the easiest part. The U.S. has clear objectives in Venezuela: regime change and restoration of democracy, a lie, the rule of law. Well, yet sanctions, international diplomacy, isolation, internal pressures have failed to deliver breakthrough. Minds are turning to military intervention. U.S. President DJ Trump has said that all options are on the table. They always like to use this all options on the table. In most of the world, we would make it clear and not the threat of all options on the table. It's just a universal situation. There are two plausible ways the U.S. might use force in Venezuela. A precision bombing campaign. They did that also in Baghdad. They did that in the Balkans. And a full-scale invasion. Ivory Coast would have to be followed by efforts to stabilize the country and establish a civilian government. That could take years, given the country's size and military strength. Venezuela has a population of 33 million, more than Cuba, spread across a territory twice the size of Iraq. Its military 160,000 strong. In paramilitaries, Chivistas, groups that support Maduro, criminal gangs, collectively have more than 100,000 members. Even military intervention begin well, U.S. forces would likely find themselves bogged down in a messy work of keeping the peace and rebuilding institutions for years. And there's no situation that would work out. Look at Afghanistan. They've been rebuilding institutions for virtually 20 years, and they've gotten nowhere. The Taliban will be back in control eventually, and then we can flip a coin. For precise strikes to work, they would need to destroy the regimes of military security of and economic infrastructure. The aim would be to eliminate the regime's ability to repress the Venezuelan people and to convince the military to abandon the Maduro government. Precise strikes are often portrayed as quick, cheap, safe, and effective alternatives to a broader military intervention. But two precise strikes operations, that's in Libya in 2011, and it's still going on 8 years later, and in Yugoslavia in 1999, underscore the unpredictable nature and their limited ability to shape political outcomes. In Libya, where the strikes lasted for several months, the intervention achieved its narrow objective, the collapse of the government of Colonel Gaddafi after his murder, but left the country in chaos. 3 months of bombing campaign in Yugoslavia was more successful. It downgraded Yugoslavian military's ability to, as what they call it, repress the population, and led to the establishment of UN-monitored political framework, although it was a more limited goal than regime change. A precision military intervention in Venezuela would require operations in the air, at the sea, and in cyberspace. Well, they've already went into cyberspace. I should have read this article before. The U.S. Navy would need to station an aircraft carrier, so like what they have going on now, off the coast of Venezuela to enforce a no-fly zone and hit military targets and critical infrastructure. The Navy would also need to deploy a group of battleships, perhaps submarines, that could launch a steady stream of the Tomahawk missiles at the regime, such as air bases, air defense facilities, communications command and control centers. The U.S. would need to deploy other assets too, such as tactical aircraft, which generally have great precision. Drones, they plan there. Deploy either from aircraft carriers or from partner nations. That's where Brazil and Colombia would get in there. Finally, U.S. forces would likely use cyber war to manipulate, degrade, and destroy the Venezuelan defense systems, which they've been working at. In the best case scenario, the Venezuelan military would defect at the sight of the first Tomahawk missile, deciding to support the new government to avoid escalation. The Venezuelan military, however, may not have the professional wherewithal after decades of degradation by the Chavistas regime to maintain order as an interim government assumes power by disarming rogue groups and supporters of Maduro. Kind of overstep myself here. Would continue to support that. In the worst case scenario, a precise strike operation would last for months, killing possibly hundreds of thousands of civilians, destroying much of what remains of the Venezuelan economy, and wiping out the state security forces. This would result in anarchy, militias, and other armed criminal gangs that would roam the streets of major cities unchecked, wreaking havoc. More than 8 million Venezuelans would likely flee. The chaos would lead the U.S. to send in ground troops in order either to finally dislodge the regime and its security forces, or to provide security once the dictatorship had collapsed and the new dictatorship installed. My words. Such a scenario is not implausible. Indeed, the most likely outcome of a campaign airstrike is the Venezuelan armed forces would disintegrate. The U.S., perhaps with international partners, the fascist governments in the area, would have no option but to send troops to neutralize Venezuela's irregular armed groups. They're talking about citizens, and restore order while the new government and security apparatus established, but they give no timetable for this. Such a peacekeeping operation would last how long it would last is hard to say, but the difficulty of the project and the complexity of the country's geography suggests that troops would stay in Venezuela for a long time than a few months, which might initially be sent. The U.S. stabilization mission in Haiti, for example, lasted 13 years for a much smaller country and not much of a military there. I think the Haitian military even had an airplane. Maybe a beanie copter. Rather than launch precision strikes and getting stuck in a ground war, the U.S. might choose to go all out from the beginning. That would mean major intervention. Both airstrikes, deployment of at least 150,000 ground troops to secure and destroy airfields, ports, oil fields, power stations, command and control centers, communication infrastructure, important government facilities, including the presidential residence of Manaflora Palace. The invading army would face 160,000 regular troops and more than 100,000 paramilitaries that would be dug in if they are reading this, and they even no doubt have read it. The most recent large-scale military intervention in Afghanistan, that was in 2001, and Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003, required U.S. troops to remain initially after the initial investigation for 20 years. By 2017, the two interventions had cost more than 2 million U.S. personnel and cost more than $1.8 trillion. More than 7,000 U.S. service members have died in Afghanistan and Iraq. The cost of intervention in Venezuela, which is a free of a kind sectarian divide that plagued Afghanistan and, of course, Iraq. Would most likely come near those numbers, but would likely be significant. The last two Latin American countries invaded was Panama. That was in 1989. And more than 27,000 U.S. personnel and more than 300 aircraft quickly overwhelmed the Panamanian defense forces of less than 20,000. Although the invasion lasted only 42 days, there's a novel by Lee Chow called The Enemy, which they talk a little bit about this, where they have their hero there, Jack Reacher, and he's called out of Panama. Then later at the end he returns. Anyway, continued for another. This is in Haiti for another 4 years and a half years. An invasion of Venezuela would take far more troops and last much longer. So that's the situation that they face. In the best case scenario, the Venezuelan military would fold quickly, and Maduro and his inner circle would flee without a fight. The Chavistas, civilian militias, and other paramilitaries would stay out of the way. Cuba and Russian security forces would abandon their posts, and the Venezuelan people would welcome the foreign forces with open arms. Well, they felt that what happened in Afghanistan did not happen at all. After the collapse of the regime, the U.S. would withdraw most of its troops, except a limited number to state of support their lackey, and restore order. Yet things would not likely go so easy. In the worst case outcome, the U.S. forces would quickly defeat the Venezuelan military, but find themselves bogged down in a guerrilla war. And there's no doubt plans are being made, and materials have been placed in the forest areas and mountains of Venezuela for that exact reality. I mean, they're not fools in the world anymore. They read the same thing as we do. After U.S. invasion, the military would likely surrender quickly. The regime would collapse. We already talked about this. There's no such thing as a risk-free military operation, but in this case, social, economic, and security costs of intervening far outweigh the benefits. Whether the U.S. launches a limited airstrike or a full-ground invasion, it would almost certainly get stuck in a long, difficult campaign to stabilize Venezuela. The oil fields would probably be destroyed. They would have to be rebuilt, and that would take years to do. And extended occupation would reignite anti-Americanism in the region, and it could bring about the fall in Colombia and problems also in Brazil. And it would become a part of the campaign, depending how quickly they do it. My take is the quicker they do this, the Trump administration, the quicker any aftermath could be coming about. And that would go into the 2020 campaign, because you would actually have the occupation. Now, if it's a prolonged situation, you'd have something very similar to a 2008, a military campaign. And these things can either go good or they can go bad. And unexpected things happen. Yes, precision bombing could do it. How good the defense system is in Venezuela is not exactly known. The Russian Federation has been there, and they have worked on this. And no doubt, as far as the military is concerned in Venezuela, there's a spy in every corner. When President Maduro calls a conference there, and there are 12 people sitting at the table, at one end, at the other end, at the four corners, there's a spy sitting there, someone hoping to sell something out to get out of the country. Let me just check our time here. Okay, we're doing all right on time. Let's see which way we'll go here. We shall go... Well, we just preview this particular thing. This is by Professor Lawrence Lessing of Harvard. I think he's still there. In the Guardian, the American democracy is broke, but we must demand 20 20 candidates commit to fixing it. Big story has a picture here of Kristen Gillibrand. The wires were abuzz last week with news that the presidential candidate Pete Bulligan returned $30,000 in contribution from lobbyists. He has now joined many other Democrats that have skipped the lobbyists. And they mention Beto O'Rourke here. But this is an odd and fake measure of reform. The most important question is now not how you get elected, but what your fundamental commitments. If you were elected, money from PAC's lobbyists is actually amongst the most moderate and least polarizing of the money in American politics. Removing it alone won't fix democracy. And this obsession with where the money comes from the obscure. The real question is about what type of reforms a candidate would have. Here, and perhaps surprisingly, given that she is amongst the world's most successful political fundraisers in America today, Nancy Pelosi has set the only meaningful bar, H.R. 1, a reform packet that she passed in the House was extraordinary, and not because of the incredible range of reforms packaged in it, but from the campaign financing to gerrymandering to commit to automated vote registration, restoration of the Voters' Rights Act. It's extraordinary because it recognizes that reforms must happen first. Fix the democracy first. And there is an interesting division opening up amongst the Democrats. The New York Senator Kristen Gillibrand this week introduced the most ambitious program to change the way campaigns are funded in 50 years. If enacted, the law would give every voter Democratic dollars to use to help fund campaigns. These dollars would be radically change the pattern of fundraising for candidates in Congress. As the experiment in Seattle shown, vouchers expand dramatically the range of citizen participation in funding of campaigns. It shifts dramatically the sources for those funds, and from out-of-district funders to representatives' own constituency. Andrew Yang has also proposed some, but he won't get a chance to do it. The real standard for that reform should be insistence upon not H.R. 1, but PONUS 1 that is ambitious, and the next president should follow the lead of Nancy Pelosi. This is the only issue that America is united about. We must at least find a way to talk about it. Lawrence Lessig is a professor of law and leadership at Harvard, founder of Equal Citizens. He was going to run for president. That was in 2016. He abandoned that situation there. So anyway, from Professor Lessig there, and let's grab a story here that we did on the week that was. I believe this is the one. Yeah, Black Lives Matter. Oklahoma City finally had their demonstration. This is for Isaiah Lewis. Hundreds stood in the rain and walked in solidarity from the streets to the steps of the Edmond Police Department. As outside of Oklahoma City, Black Lives Matter hosted a rally in Lewis's honor. His father took to the mic, and the teenager was subdued by taser and then shot dead in someone's house in the neighborhood. That's one of the questions that the family has, and that's something the police department should want to have, because it would protect them as well. The Lewis family walked along, surrounded by supporters, frustrated because the final moments of Lewis's death are still in question. They are villainizing this police department, and they should put their lives on the line for any person. No, there's some one counter demonstrator that was there. And they don't have all the evidence. From the police department's statement here is, we're having to work off the evidence we have, Wagner said, and we are working hard to be transparent as we can through the process. The process does not move as quickly as everyone would want them to. The part that we need to hear is the account that happened inside the house from them. Neither officer were wearing body cameras. One officer was hospitalized with a head injury. That's where he fought with the officers before being tased and shot. Tasered, and the moments before, his girlfriend was on the other end of 911, saying her boyfriend had flipped out, and she called 911. One of those situations. It's hard to accept it, but I have to accept it. That's what his father said, and of course he died in the hospital after being shot. Evidently, he departed his girlfriend's house, ran around the neighborhood about an hour, and ended up in some stranger's house, and that was where he was finally caught. But it went on and on and on. It wasn't an instant situation for sure. Before I forget here, the 5th of May was Karl Marx, his birthday. We won't want to forget Karl Marx. And also Pete Seeger, would be 100 years old. Legacy gets immortalized with Smithsonian Folkways collection. This was on the 1st of May. Here, this is from NPR. Pete Seeger, the heralded folk singer, songwriter, and activist, died in 2014. It's been 5 years. His voice left an impression on America, and on May 3rd, 2019, Pete Seeger would have been 100 years old. And that is being marked by his the Folkway collection there at the Smithsonian Institute. We'll have to hear from Woody's granddaughter, Sarah, as we close out here. We always start this with Take Me Out to the Ballpark. Anyway, Pete Seeger, we'll talk more about him. Let me see what else we've got brewing here that sometimes we have things that are sort of left over we don't get around to. We won't have time to deal with that for sure. Berkshire Hathaway. We'll have other broadcasts coming up here, and we'll get to those a little later. Okay, let's do the sport. The Nuggets, 116-112 over the Portland Trailblazers. That series as the semifinals in the NBA's Western Conference. In Game 4 is now tied 2-2. And the other game, the Raptors 101 over the Philadelphia 76ers in Philly to 96 for them. Is now tied 2-2. This will be going on and on and on and on and on and on. And in hockey, the Blues win 4-1 over the Dallas Stars. And let's go to Major League Baseball. Oops. Games on a Sunday night. We'll have to get the full. We were able to tune into a few of those games. Tigers are 5-2 over the Royals in the Motor City. The Mariners 10-0 shut out Cleveland, and in 10 Atlanta 3-1 over the hapless Marlins, who will be in Chicago, I believe, or will the Cubs anyway, wherever the Cubs will be. The Pirates 5-3 over the Athletics in 13. A lot of extra inning games here. Phillies 7-1 over the hapless Nationals. The Red Sox 9-2 over the White Sox. The Brewers 3-2 over the Mets. The Rangers 10-2 over Toronto. The Rockets 8-7 in a slugfest in Denver over the D-backs. The Astros are back to their winning ways, 10-4 out in Los Angeles over the Angels. And the Yankees are 4-1 over the Twins. In 8, I guess rain must have got them. The Padres 8-5 over the Dodgers. And the Giants 6-5 over the Reds. And the Cubs had a slugfest in Wrigley Field, 11-5 over the Cardinals. That wasn't the whole game. The whole story, I should say. The Cardinals had 12 hits, and the Cubs had 12 hits, and also Flores still won the game. And the Rays and Orioles in Camden Yard was postponed because of rain. And let me just make sure that we got everything here. Over to the old National Hockey League. It was only one game. Blues and Stars. That series, what did we say was it? Tied up 3-3. That was game 6. The Blues won that game in Dallas. And let me see quickly here. Check on our time again. I will give it up at this stage of the game. Nonetheless, this is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on the 6th of May, 2019. The Uber strike on Wednesday is coming up. And we have a headline here. Facebook labels post by hand, posing privacy questions. We'll go more into it. Subcontracted out to as many as 260 contract workers in Hyderabad, India. And they were literally plunged through millions of Facebook photos, status updates, and other things since 2004. I think we have a chance we can dispose of this fairly quickly here. The workers are categorized items according to 5 dimensions, as Facebook call them. They include the subjects of the post. Is it a food, for example, or is it a selfie or an animal? What is the occasion, everyday activity, major life events? And what is the author's intention to plan an event to inspire, to make a joke? The work is aiming at understanding how the types of things users post on its service are changing. Facebook says the details of the efforts were provided by multiple workers from Wipro Limited and over several months. The workers spoke on obviously conditions of anonymity. Facebook later confirmed that many of the details. WIPO is amongst the 200 content label projects that Facebook has. This is from Reuters, incidentally. The context labeling program could raise new privacy issues for Facebook, according to legal experts consulted by Reuters. The WIPO, I guess, WIPRO, workers said they gained a window into their lives as they viewed vacation photos, posts immortalizing deceased family members. Boy, the company says its legal and privacy terms must sign off on all labeling efforts, adding that it recently introduced an auditing system to ensure privacy expectations are being followed and perimeters in place as work expanded. One former Facebook manager, again speaking anonymously, expressed unease about users' posts being scrutinized without the explicit permission. Now, under the EU's Euro Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, has strict rules about how companies gather and use personal data, and in many cases require specific consent. One of the key measures is purpose limitation. That's John Kennedy, a partner at a law firm, Wigan and Dana, who worked on outsourcing privacy and artificial intelligence. Senator Mark Warner, a leading critic of social media, told Reuters that large platforms increasingly are taking more and more data from users and for wider and more far-reaching use. And let me finish this up here. It's a very long article. Facebook and other companies are testing techniques to curtail the need for outsourced labeling, in part the analysis of more data, faster and cheaper. AL training data for news feed rankings, photo descriptions. A lot of this for the blind came from hashtags from Insignia posts there. We're trying to minimize the amount of things we send out. So this will do it for us. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.